Welcome to Radnor Studio 21 and my show Relationship Matters. My name is Linda Hershman and I'm the owner of the Couples and Family Wellness Center with offices in Berwyn and Paoli, and we provide mental health counseling for individuals, couples, families, teens, and tweens. And today I'm excited to introduce my guest, Diana Ahl. Diana is a certified professional coach and an educator. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your background and then we'll get into why you're here.
Great. I have been an educator for 25 years, and I am also a certified professional coach specializing in performance and leadership development.
And you and I had a conversation about something called Shamefree Learning, and that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Wonderful.
When I first heard the term Shamefree Learning, I thought, okay, what is this and how can people relate to it? And then I thought about the antonym, which in my mind would be shaming learning, and I suddenly got it. I thought, okay, and I remembered some experiences in junior high and even one experience in graduate school where I left the classroom feeling very shamed by my teacher or my professor.
Right.
And I thought, there are a lot of people out there who have had this experience. Can you tell us what shame-free learning is and why it's important?
Well, first of all, being in education for 25 years, obviously a lot of things have changed. And what we're seeing more and more are kids coming to us at all levels with heightened amounts of anxiety and stress to the point that they're unable to perform, really. And it's kind of a vicious circle where education is under fire a lot nowadays and constantly being, shamed for what they're not doing or what they're not getting right. Teachers then are being shamed for not getting it right or having to be held more accountable for their results. And, shame begets shame. So it just ends up being this vicious circle that then the teacher thinks that the only way to really truly motivate the student, not intentionally shaming them, but having that element of shame be present in the conversation, in the learning, in the classroom. The kid then is shamed, has a horrible experience about learning, goes home, the parents are shaming the kid or the parents are shaming the administration, and it just is this vicious cycle of shame all the time. We see a lot of blame shame. So the idea behind shameless learning is to replace the blame shame cycle with, ownership. What's my role in what goes on? As a parent, as a child, as an administrator, as a teacher, what's my role in all of this? How to take responsibility for what your role is, and then replacing the shame with vulnerability and courageous conversations. And really, vulnerability is the door that unlocks your growth. It's also what shines a light on shame and allows shame to exit, leave.
How did we develop this culture of shame?
Well, we have become, as a society, very failure averse, very obstacle averse, and we're literally trying to get every obstacle out of the way. We don't want to feel bad. We don't want to ever fall down. We don't ever want to get an F on a test. We don't ever want to be told, no, you can't. So we've become very failure averse, and it's societal. It's not just in schools, it's everywhere. And failure is how you get there. What is happening now is we as a society are becoming less and less resilient. And the reason for that is because, confidence is a result. It's not a requirement. And the way you build confidence is by falling down and learning to work through the obstacles. Well, if you don't have any obstacles, or you're never allowed to fail, because failure is a lot of, a negative word with a shameful spin on it, you can't build confidence in yourself and you can't build resilience. And the way through, the way to get to shameless learning is by creating a culture that emphasizes progress, that emphasizes learning, and not the achievement part of it.
As you're talking about that, I'm thinking, for example, what I've read about Japanese cultures, which are highly achievement oriented, and from what I understand, use shaming as a way of trying to motivate. Japanese students also have incredibly high suicide rates, let alone anxiety, depression, and everything else. And yet, in our culture, if you talk about letting children fail, if you talk about adapting the curriculum differently to play to people's strengths, you're going to get responses back like, well, we have to keep up with this culture and science, and this one is going to surpass us in math. How can you get congruence between shameless learning and genuine achievement that's going to keep us in a position in the world?
Well, I think my first question is, I would want somebody to define why it matters so much that we have to surpass. Why is this a big competition? We live in one world, and we all have different strengths. What we should be doing is looking more globally to work with each other's strengths to bring us all up, not just Japan versus the United States, for example. The other thing I want to point out is that the United States, we educate every child. In a lot of other countries, they don't educate every child. There's certain ones that can go to school and other ones that can't. So when you're educating every single child, it's because you believe that every single person has something to offer. And if that's the case, then your results are automatically going to be different. It's like apples to oranges, really. You're trying to compare results that aren't lined up the same way. There are different variables at work here. And I think that the way to get out of shaming is to stop having the comparison syndrome that we all suffer from, and start working our own strengths and staying in our own lane. How do you know we can't create something unique and spectacular that the rest of the world won't look to and say, hey, I think they've got something. We're onto something here.
That's a very different way to look at it. When I hear you using the words shame and vulnerability, I know where this is coming from, but can you talk more about where that comes from?
Well, I think the shame and the vulnerability for me is just, again, I was shamed in school. And that whole thing about shame begets shamed, we wonder why people walk around and think, I'm not enough. I've got this I'm not enough syndrome. And it's because of the shame. And like I said, I don't think that teachers or administrators or even parents intentionally shame, but it's the implicit messaging around failure that incites the most shame. And that is, oh, I'll call whoever and get you out of whatever, or I won't let you have a C for the year. And the implicit messaging that a child walks away with is, they don't think I can do it. They don't believe in me. And so it's not always explicit shame. A lot of times it's implicit shame that is the most damaging. And I am a big fan of Brene Brown, who has done a lot of work with vulnerability and shame. And I'm really hoping that we can extend her work into the classroom, because I think it's so desperately needed, that when I see, 15-year-olds coming into a classroom who are so uptight around their performance that they cannot settle down because they're so worried about the grade that they're going to end up getting, that to me is heartbreaking. I mean, I have people tell me all the time, aren't you worried about the future kids these days? And I'm like, no, you know what? I think I've got fantastic kids in front of me. I'm more positive about our future than ever. However, I think we've got a real issue when it comes to shame, and we're not showing up vulnerably for each other, for kids. We're not modeling what it looks like, and therefore they think that it's not, they have to constantly be achieving in order to get affection, in order to feel valued.
And paradoxically, when we're pushing kids through, when we're not allowing them to fail, they get to a certain level where they're on their own, their parents can't take care of them, they can't get pushed through things, and suddenly it seems to me like there's a really high potential for a crash.
Yes. It's very interesting. The one thing that we as parents have tried so desperately to keep them from is the very thing that we create more of, and that's anxiety and failure. So we're trying to keep them from failing because we've put the label on it as being bad, but then they end up failing because they're out on their own as adults and they don't know how to think for themselves. They don't know how to make a decision, or even worse, they don't know how to get up when something's gone terribly wrong and how to figure it out. And their whole world comes crashing down on them. And, it's just devastating to think that that's what's going on.
And we're doing such a disservice to our kids when parents go and fight for better grades for their kids, and then, for example, they go off to college and they are on their own. They don't have the parents fighting for a better grade, a different grade, and they find out, oh, wait a minute, I really don't know this stuff.
Yeah. And I think that happened to me. Not that my parents were fighting for my grades, but I think there is a certain time that we all, get to college and suddenly realize, hey, you know what, I memorized what I needed to for the test, but I really don't know this. And so I think with me, the whole part about Shameless Learning is getting them to love learning again, getting them to play again when it comes to learning. We take things so seriously that we've forgotten how to play and have fun with learning, and, how to learn to love being challenged and love having to figure things out instead of running the other way when things get, quote unquote, too hard.
When you were talking about everybody taking responsibility for their part, the student, the parents, the teachers, the administrators, what you are talking about in therapy language is systemic thinking, which is the way marriage and family therapists think, that nobody is responsible for causing a problem. Everybody contributes to the dynamic, and each person is responsible for their part in the dynamic changing. And yes. Can we look at where each part of the system might be able to start making their changes? And let's start with the kids, because I'm thinking, well, all right, but the kids don't have much power here.
Unfortunately, kids at times feel very powerless because, they're wanting to please. They're wanting the approval of their parents, and they're wanting the approval of their teachers and ultimately colleges in many cases. But I think that kids do hold a lot of cards here. And I don't want to paint them as powerless, because I actually think that our kids are brighter than ever, and the kids that I see, have a good sense of self. Our kids have more access to things than you and I did growing up, and they have different viewpoints. And I think that if we could tap into them through, mindfulness, through, coaching and positive education, I think we really could get them to adapt a different mindset about learning. And I think that we need to start with the teachers. Honestly, your teachers are the ones that are front and center. And I'm not saying that your teachers don't do a good job. I think a lot of our teachers do an amazing job with what they have, with resources and so forth that they have to work with. But if we really, really want to go at this, get the doers in. Get the doers front and center, and start coaching your teachers on positive education, on mindful learning, and let's see what happens. I think you start with your teachers, you make good connection with the kids, get them to try something new, and see how they settle down. I know, I have seen firsthand how kids really will settle down and adapt a new mindset and a new way of doing things when they can relax and know that there is another alternative to being pressure-filled and achieving obsessed.
As a professional coach, if you had a blank slate, How would you go about coaching teachers to instill a positive mindset and to move away from shaming, whether inadvertently or overtly?
Well, I think there's a program out there called Coach-Centric Leadership for Educators. It's a wonderful program through IPEC that basically takes them through a coaching framework, through a coaching training specifically geared for educators, and teaches teachers how to basically coach students through obstacles, not giving them the answers, not overdoing it for them, and daring to lead. You know, and I know Brene Brown's has a wonderful book out called Dare to Lead, her framework as well. So I think if you put the coach-centric leadership for teachers and the Dare to Lead framework together, you would have an amazing intensive training program for teachers that they could be using right off the bat in their classes. I mean, immediately.
And I know you are just one person facing an enormous, incredibly bureaucratic system. How would you get through to the administrators and to the state legislators and the people who are making these decisions about the way our education is being taught and presented?
I think there's a huge focus on mental health right now. If you look at the rising costs of mental health for your education professionals, start there. Look at the costs are just going through the roof year after year. Start by looking at the mental health rising costs and in anxiety and suicide prevention programs for teens these days because they're so stressed out. If you look at the results there, you really don't need to look much further. There's a lot of stigma around mental health. There's a lot of great awareness that's coming into our central focal point these days around mental health, and I think that's the way in. We need to do something different. If we're going to keep doing what we've always done, we're going to keep getting what we've always gotten. And what we have is an entire generation of kids and young adults who are stressed out of their minds.
Yes, I agree. And we've done programs on that before on this show, and it sounds to me like you're saying you also need to get the school guidance counselors involved in this process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And in November, I'm actually going to be trained by Brene Brown. She is running a Dare to Lead certified facilitator program, and she's going to be training me and many other people. And one of the reasons I am able to go is because I'm a certified professional coach. If I wasn't a coach as a teacher, I wouldn't be able to get in, because it's right now she's at the point where she's only working with guidance counselors and school psychologists and administrators for the program. So I actually feel really lucky, and clinicians as well in the field. So I actually feel really, really privileged that I get to go and be trained by the leading researcher on shame and vulnerability.
And what do you hope to do when you come back? You go for this training, you get this wonderful experience, and I adore Brene Brown.
Who doesn't?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And then you come back to the real world. What's your game plan? What's your vision, I should ask?
Well, my ultimate vision is to be taking the framework from Dare to Lead and bringing it to classrooms and teachers all over the country, working with administrators to bring this framework to their teachers and ultimately to the students. So that's my grand vision.
Okay, and again, I know this is not a problem you can single-handedly solve, but on a macro level, you've got this great widget, and how do you get the taxpayers who don't even want children taking music or recess or art classes in school anymore to say, sure, we'll pay for it?
Well, I don't actually see it as being separate and apart. Like, I don't think it's a separate and apart curriculum. I think it's something that would be infused. I see it as being embedded in the way we deliver instruction. So I don't necessarily see it as being a separate program. However, you're right, they are going to have to fund the training and so forth to get everyone trained. I don't know exactly what I would do with that. I think that you're always going to have naysayers. You're always going to have people that are not going to want to do anything more, and they already feel like they're paying too much taxes towards education. But I think the one thing we can all agree on is that the amount of shame in society today is at an all-time high, and it's something that needs to be addressed. And what better place to address it than a young child who has all of the future in their hands.
And on a more micro level, since we do, by virtue of this program, have the ability to outreach to a lot of parents, how would you tell, given the absence of formalized programs, how would you suggest that the parents start with this, and what kinds of tips can you give them to move out of the helicopter parenting role and into a more supportive role?
Right. I would say there are a couple of books that I would recommend for them to read. One is The Gift of Failure, and the other one is The Self-Driven Child. And there are wonderful tips that are scientific research based on parent as consultant, not helicopter. So stepping out in the mode, stepping out of the central fix-it mode, into more of a consultant. I'm here to answer your questions. I believe that you have the ability to get the answers for yourself. I'm here to serve as a sounding board, and drop the judgment. It's hard to do sometimes.
Yes.
It's hard to do sometimes.
Yeah, it is hard to do, and I'm thinking about you've got a child who is, by the standards that are set externally, underachieving in a certain area or in general in school. How does a parent manage their own anxiety? And this is maybe in large part a question in my discipline, in the mental health field, but from your perspective as an educator and a professional coach, how does the parent manage the anxiety to become more of a consultant rather than a helicopter parent?
Yeah, I think that is more of your wheelhouse. But I think the one thing I would say is that shame and fear are at the basis of all of that. The helicoptering comes from shame that they're going to be judged. So there's a lot of judgment that parents feel all the time about where their kid goes to school, or what classes the child is taking. And so I think getting them to release the pressure off of themselves to be perfect and release the judgment of themselves around their child's performance and where they go to school is the first critical step. I do think that I think that they do need to work. We all as parents have anxiety about this, and I think it is something that we need to really work with a mental health professional to examine our own issues with why are we driving so hard or so afraid all the time.
And this brings up the fact that coaches, professional coaches, and mental health counselors such as myself coexist beautifully, and our work can complement one another.
Greatly.
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Okay, and is there anything that I did not think to ask you in the remaining minute?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay. I thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope that there are some parents out here who are listening, and possibly some teachers who are listening, who hear this and say, there is a better way. We can have successful children who grow up to be successful adults in a way that's very different than our system has set it up.
Exactly. Thank you so much for having me.
I'd like to thank my guest, Diana Ahl. This is Linda Hershman from Relationship Matters, and we look forward to seeing you next time.